Leon crazy it's taking so much time, seeing all the sights. Finally they go out and they get into a cab. Cabman says, "Where to?" "Anywhere," says Leon. And then the cab sets off. Oh, it's a coach. Well, at that point, the writing refuses to go inside. I mean, that's where the action's going to be. The two of them are going to, in fact, make love inside of this coach, this cab. But the writing won't go there. Instead, we'll have a whole page of people playing boule, of people walking around gardens, and of this cab making its way, winding its way, in fact, frenetically making its way throughout the city. And, of course, the coachman is completely bewildered. Like, what's going on? Why are these people, where are they going? When are they going to get out? I quote, "He could not understand," I want you to listen to the vocabulary, "he could not understand what furious locomotive urge prevented these people from ever coming to a stop." It's a beautiful line about displaced sexuality, because that's what's happening inside the coach. What furious locomotive urge prevented these people from ever coming to a stop? Or we read about a cab with all blinds drawn that reappeared incessantly. It's like it's being seen all over the city. And then, again, these exquisite, I think, similes. "More tightly sealed than a tomb and tossed around like a ship on the waves." And again, giving us a sense of the privacy, the secrecy that they at last have, and then the kind of violence and voluptuousness of what they're doing inside the cab. But it's remarkable writing. Almost any other writer in the history of the novel would have taken you inside the cab to describe what's going on. The end of the sequence is at about 6 o'clock, the carriage stopped in a back street of the Beauvoisine quarter, and a woman got out, walking with her veil down and without looking back. And that's all we get. That's quite a bit, though. The most venomous thing in the book, it seems to me, and it's a book with a lot of venom, is the use of quotations. I've already suggested that every time the characters speak, they get nailed by the cliché nature of what it is that they say, as if that were all that we're capable of enunciating. It's as if that the language that we're outfitted with for expressing our views were polluted or degraded, quite in contrast, of course, to the beautiful, modulated, exquisite language of the writer. We remember, for example, the episode of Emma and Leon when they first meet, and they talk about sunsets over the sea, and they talk about the exquisite landscapes in the mountains. That's the sort of cliched stuff that I had in mind. Or you remember, I cited it earlier, the encounter between Emma and Rodolphe, where they have sex, and afterwards she goes home and she says, "I have a lover," and contrast that just in terms of the adequacy of sort of accounting for what it was versus blood coursing through her flesh like a river of milk. It's a vision of a terrible disconnect, and that's not even the right word, a terrible sort of gap, a kind of fissure between what we feel and what we can say. And one of the most beautiful, remarkable utterances in the book is devoted to that. It's about Rodolphe, who was getting bored already with Emma because he's had so many different lovers, and he's heard the same discourse. How free are you to create a new language of love? I mean, people have been loving for a long, long time. And you could claim that both the gestures of love and the language of love have to be conventional. It's hard to manufacture new ones. It's hard to be original. It's hard to be creative. And so Rodolphe has heard all of this, feels like, once again, it's the tedium of having a lover, a mistress. In fact, Flaubert writes that she was like all of his mistresses, and that the charm of novelty, he says, laid bare the eternal monotony of passion. What a bitter phrase. The eternal monotony of passion. But Flaubert doesn't stop with that, and this is where the book has a kind of generosity and plenitude that we don't really expect. He says this man, Rodolphe, who had had so much experience with women, so many love affairs, he couldn't go past the cliche-like nature of the words that these people spoke. And he assumed, therefore, that they all felt the same things. And here is one of the exquisite passages that I was alluding to. As though the abundance of one's soul did not sometimes overflow with empty metaphors, since no one ever has been able to give the exact measure of his needs, his concepts, or his sorrows. And then it just gets even more eloquent. The human tongue is like a cracked cauldron on which we beat out tunes to set a bear dancing when we would make the stars weep with our melodies. That's one of the most tragic passages that I know of. That our tongue, our capacity to speak, is like a cracked cauldron. And we use it because we are in ecstasy. We are trying to state what is most magnificent, remarkable, stunning, and unique about our experiences. And we would want the stars themselves to weep, and instead the bears dance. So that this seems to be just a misfit, a kind of hardwired misfit between our equipment on the one hand and our sensations and feelings on the other. Our equipment meaning our verbal equipment. I said there's venom in another venomous thing, perhaps the most venomous of all, has to do with the composition of the book. I've used the word contrapuntal before, and I want to say more about it now. The way in which scenes might be arranged. Here is the godlike aspect of the novelist. He's the fellow who's doing the arranging. I've already mentioned the contrast between Emma and Léon speaking their cliches, and Homais giving us this almanac version of what's going on in Yonville. We have other sequences as well. We have one where we have a description of Charles going through all of the kind of grisly, grimy experiences of being a country doctor, bloodletting and getting blood spurting in his face, doing bedpans, and all of this is juxtaposed against Emma getting her fine stationery out, even though she has no one to write to, dusting off her books, thinking about Paris, where she might go. But perhaps the greatest scene of this sort, and one of the great scenes in literature itself, takes place at the agricultural fair. And that is when Rodolphe makes his great love declaration to Emma. Now, it's an agricultural fair. It's called the Comice Agricole in French. And it is the backdrop for this love declaration. Well, that makes sense. That's okay. But of course, people talk at an agricultural fair. And in particular, the kind of talk you hear is political rhetoric and the talk about farm animals. And you ask yourself, well, how compatible is that going to be with the discourse of love? So Rodolphe is sitting next to Emma, and he tells things to her like, we met in our dreams. And then you hear in the next sentence the speaker saying something about the production of cider, the growing of colza, the making of cheeses, the treatment of flax. And you're the one now who starts to juxtapose and weave and say, well, wait a minute. These two things sort of comment on each other. But the full-blown passage, I'll read you a better, richer, nastier piece of it, is when Rodolphe is finally ready to seize her hand. And I want you to hear, you'll see what my word contrapuntal refers to. And he seized her hand. She did not withdraw it. First prize for general farming, announced the president. Just now, for example, when I went to your home, to Mr. Bizat of Quincampoix. Did I know I would accompany you? 70 francs. 100 times, this is all Rodolphe, I tried to leave, yet I followed you and stayed for manures. That's my favorite one. They're going to give a prize for manures, and he's talking about being irresistibly drawn to her. As I would stay tonight, tomorrow, all other days, all my life.